If one man's sin can wreak this kind of havoc in all of God's good creation, can you imagine what two people's sin can do? And then you unite them and make them be husband and wife. There are a lot of Christians in church today that look like everything other than Jesus. But they claim themselves to be the authority on how everybody else should be living, even though they don't look like Jesus. And we love them like we're all in that boat from time to time where we are consistently looking at everybody else's problems, but not identifying the fact that we don't know Jesus better today than we did yesterday. That's where the Pharisees are at. And so they're testing Jesus. I love that. Like, who are you to test Jesus? Yeah, it doesn't matter. They're doing it. They're testing Jesus. And in this case, they decide, let's pick on one of the hardest things to deal with in life today. What do they pick on? Marriage. Okay. That's interesting, right? Because we're sold today that marriage is perfect as long as you find the right one. I love the interaction this morning. This is pretty good. Yeah, marriage is perfect as long as you're in love. Compatibility is the key, you see. If you find someone you're compatible with, then you're going to have the best marriage ever. I've learned over, I think it's 25 plus marriages now that I have officiated, that there are many who come in unwilling to receive a lot of good counsel because they are convinced that they're going to have the one marriage that nobody else has. They're going to have the perfect one. And where everybody else, they had troubles, it's because they didn't have what this couple has, right? And I always have to be the bearer of bad news, and I have to be the one that says, hey, I know you feel like you got a really great thing going, but we're going to talk in a year when you realize that you don't, and everything's going to be all right. We're going to get you back on track. But we're sold all the time. Man, oh yeah, I can have the perfect marriage. I can have the perfect relationship because I'm in love with this person and the whole bit, and it ends up to be quite a different story once you're on the other side of I do. Here's some good news for you. It has been the same since Adam and Eve. It's never really changed. And that's why we romanticize this thing, and that's why we publish this thing in ways of movies and stories to get people interested, because we talk about what nobody's really ever experienced. That's why people are so interested. Because, oh man, I want to have love like that. Oh man, I want to have a relationship like that. It's all fiction, folks. It's fiction. That's why it's attractive. Reality is much different. And the Pharisees think if we can trip Jesus up in one place, it's going to be marriage. Let's deal with this one. And so Jesus draws them back to the origin story. When they say, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? I think they're bringing up the main issue that happens when people promise to love forever and people commit to going the long haul, but then fall short. I think when it comes to our vows, we've forgotten that the marriage vows at one time were called solemn vows. Solemn vows? That shouldn't be solemn. I'm being united to the one that I love forever and ever and ever and all that good stuff, right? No, it's solemn because if you're honest with yourself, you only have a certain capacity, and your capacity has expiration. I love to see tough guys when they want to come into the ring and try and fight for their first time, because most of the time people feel like they're really, really strong, and they've watched enough action movies to think that they're going to make it 10 minutes and they're going to be the toughest, strongest guy. And after about 60 seconds of hard exertion, they're out. They're panting. They can't breathe. They can't handle it. Because in our minds, we think, oh, I'm the toughest thing in the world. But when action plays out, it's a little bit different. Guess what marriage is? It's actually in the same vein, believe it or not. But there's good news. I'm not trying to be a downer today. I'm just trying to expose the fact that many times we make commitments, we make promises, we think we can endure, and the reality is we are finite and limited, and we can't. And more damage has been done in the world today by the broken marriage and the broken home and the broken family than any other policy or politic. Family is the centrality of what God orchestrated for there to not only be unity, but the expression of his love. And you mess up the family, you mess up the world. And so the Pharisees recognize that the family is serious, but they have on their own already seen how difficult marriage is. And through the process of watching all these marriages fail, they pulled upon an obscure passage of the law where Moses permitted, because of the destructive nature of sin, for there to be a breakup in the marriage. Because I don't know if you know, but people can be very dangerous in sin. And in that dangerous nature, they can harm. We have in our world a consistent, abusive culture that mistreats and mishandles precious things. Now, I will say that in our culture, we're a little quick to cry victim, but the reality is we live in a time that heavily abuses good things. And so when they're calling on Jesus, he brings them back to the origin. Well, isn't it lawful, Jesus? I mean, things are pretty bad and things are pretty chaotic. And I find the presentation of what the Pharisees are bringing about marriage to kind of correlate to creation. Because up to this point, even though creation has kind of limped along, it's been very chaotic since it was divorced from God. Remember in the garden, Adam and Eve were united with God. And heaven and earth was united in this place that God planted called the garden. His presence would descend upon it, and there was unity. God would actually rest in the garden. Think of that. Think of heaven for a second, because heaven at its purest place is where God rests upon his throne. And Eden was the place that God's presence would rest upon the earth. Heaven would meet earth in the garden. And Adam and Eve were formed to be in the image of God. They were formed from the dust of the earth. Let me just clarify before somebody gets cute. Adam was formed from the earth, and then Eve was taken from Adam. So these are a representation of God from creation to creation. Are you following me? Okay. All is united. All is in a position of unity. In fact, even God explaining to Adam in kind of a creative and humorous way to realize that he's not enough on his own. He brings all the animals. Adam names all the animals, and Adam discovers, hey, there's not a helper suitable. And I kind of feel like God is sitting back saying, the boy finally got it. And puts Adam to sleep and then takes out his rib and then forms Eve. And so now the complete picture of God's image is available through the unity of Adam and Eve. And the unity of Adam and Eve also gives them the ability to accomplish God's will. He had two things that they were to do. The first was to be fruitful and multiply, to bring the earth into dominion. Dominion to what? The second thing that he called them to do, which was to tend the garden. They were to bring the earth into dominion so that it would be like the garden of God, where God's presence was united to the earth, and where Adam and Eve, those who were created as the image of God from the earth, would be united with God. The picture of what God is doing in all of creation is not breaking it apart and making it a chaotic place, but rather bringing it together and making it a fulfilling place. We hunger for relationships. We hunger for unity. We hunger for being of the same mind and the same heart. That's what God was doing. But sin, through the chaos that it brings, ripped everything to shreds. And God, without abandoning it, desires for it to be reunited. And as the Pharisees are bringing up one of the hardest parts of the law, well, hey, I thought it was okay to allow the chaos and sin that drives man apart from woman. I think that's okay under God's heart. And Jesus has to bring them back. No. It's not okay, because that's not how it was in the beginning. That's not how God intended this to be, which is why you need to know who God is. and that there's only one. Because if you misconstrue who God is, you won't understand his plan for your life. He does not want you ripped apart by the chaos of sin. He wants you united to his life, because when he brought everything into being, he intended perfection. He intended beauty. He intended good. That's why over his creation, he says, it is good. But when sin enters, the good gets twisted, and twisted good is bad. And when we see the bad things in this world, what do we usually do? We shake our fists at God. Well, God, if you were all powerful, you wouldn't let bad things happen. Here's the reality. God has allowed the bad things to happen so he can fix the bad things. Because he doesn't want to just start all over by obliterating things. He wants us to be brought back into unity with him. He wants us to be in a state where we can be together. They had a horrible analogy for marriage in the past where they would call it the ball and chain. The ball and chain. You're not free. You're shackled to your promise, shackled to your spouse. And oh, what torture, what horrendous difficulty is presented in us being forced to be with this other person. My friends, that was never God's heart. Why is it that we are so incompatible? Why is it that we have such agitation and anger and fury and hardship in relationship with others? I'll give you a hint. It's not because of the design. It's because of the agent. The agent in marriage that makes it so difficult to be united is sin. And while that's easily passed off as just the bad things we do, if you take a close look at what sin is in Scripture, sin is your ego that chooses your way over God's way. I want you to think about this just for a second. In the book of Romans, it explains that all of creation was subjected to this horrible chaos through one man's sin, Adam. In other words, one guy blew it. You had one job, dude. That was it. He made a mess of it. If one man's sin can wreak this kind of havoc in all of God's good creation, can you imagine what two people's sin can do? And then you unite them and make them be husband and wife. This is like atom bombs. Split that atom, and all of a sudden, everything goes nuts. I just realized split the atom. Y'all, that's free. That's funny. You can laugh. It's all right. That's good. You're not laughing. All right. Well, praise God. It'll bless you on your way home. I want you to write this down. Heaven is God's dwelling place where his presence resides. She got it. The place where God resides is perfect, it's unified, it's holy, it's good. The pain, the chaos, the crazy that subjects us to the point where we're like, why do we even do this thing called life? That is so foreign to why God brought everything into existence. It's hard to even explain. We were never intended for that. And so heaven is that place where his presence resides, and he wanted that to be united to the earth, but sin broke it apart. Now, God, being the creator of heaven and earth, does not desire for this to be the end of everything. He could crumple it all up. He could obliterate it. He could just let it go. I mean, the book of Hebrews says he's holding it all together in his hands. He could just say, I'm done, let it go. It'd be all gone. But out of his love, he says, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring it back into unity. I'm going to pay the price that must be paid so that everything can be set back in the way that it needs to go.